Hey, this is Mike Robbins. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of the podcast. I hope you're doing well, you, your family, your team, everyone around you, as we roll through October as I'm recording this. I want to talk today about this concept of knowing the difference between sore and hurt. Now, I started thinking about this a few weeks ago. Actually, I guess it's been almost a couple months now. I tweaked my calf running back in August, and I'd been running quite a bit, and I'd been feeling kind of sore, and sometimes my hamstrings get sore, and sometimes my calves get sore. And anyway, my calf was sore over the span of a few days, over about a week, and I was stretching it and stretching it. And I went out to run this one particular morning, and I probably shouldn't have, but I did. And then as I was running, it like grabbed on me pretty bad. And I had to stop running. And then I was limping home and I had to actually call Michelle to come pick me up. And the last couple months, I haven't really been running, although I did try to jog just a little bit in the last few days, even this morning, and gingerly kind of getting back into it. But it got me thinking. I mean, I have quite a bit of experience with physical injuries, as you know, if you've been listening to the show for any amount of time or following my work. I was a professional baseball player, played in college, played in high school, played all growing up, and my career ended because of arm injuries to my pitching arm. And went through a series of surgeries. So I've had quite a bit of experience as an athlete with injuries and with soreness and also being hurt. But that was half my lifetime ago. So I haven't been a competitive athlete for quite a long time. Um, but it got me thinking both about this from a physical standpoint, but I think there's a larger connection to kind of how we operate in life with ourselves, with the people around us, with our relationships, with our teams, with our businesses that's important here. So, this idea of are you sore or are you hurt is a really important one. Again, my coaches and trainers used to talk to me about this all the time because I was a pitcher, right? And there's a lot of soreness that's involved in pitching even when you're not hurt. Now, I was someone who dealt with injuries, sort of prolonged injuries for a long period of time, particularly when I was, late high school, all through college and all through professional baseball. Um, but there is a difference between soreness, which is part of playing any sport or any physical activity, often even when we're building muscle and getting better at something, and actually being hurt. And so our coaches and our trainers would often talk to us about know your body and know the difference, because when you're sore, that's often a sign of, you're doing certain things right or you're exerting yourself in a certain way. That's just part of the deal. And yeah, you do need to manage the soreness, and you got to take some rests and some breaks and make sure that you're stretching and icing and doing all the things you need to do so that the soreness doesn't get chronic or ultimately turn into an injury. But there's a difference when you actually get hurt. And when you get hurt, then you got to stop and you have to actually focus on not only resting, but recovering from the injury, rehabbing from the injury. If it's minor enough, it can just be maybe some rest and some physical therapy. If it's more significant, it might involve more intervention, medication, and ultimately, potentially even surgery. And again, this is not me giving any medical advice because I am clearly not qualified to do that. But I think, as an athlete, I watched myself and I watched others at times struggle with this difference, not knowing, thinking it was just soreness, it was just soreness, it was just soreness. And then it actually was an injury. Again, my little calf injury was an example of like, wait a minute, is this soreness that I can just push through and it'll eventually go away? Or do I need to back off so that it doesn't actually turn into to a real injury, which is what ultimately happened for me with my calf. And, not that big of a deal in the scheme of my life these days, but, still an important reminder. And there are times when, my hamstrings are sore or my back's sore or something's a little sore, and I can just continue to do what I'm doing, push through it. And that's a healthy, important part of not only continuing to stay active, but just life in general, right? Knowing when the soreness is normal and healthy and we can just push through it. Sometimes we back off so much on the soreness thinking that we're hurt, but we're not actually hurt. And then other times we pretend like we're not really hurt when we are. and just act like it's soreness, or maybe don't even acknowledge the soreness. Now, again, I'm talking about this in a physical context, but think about this in terms of life, in terms of growth, in terms of issues and challenges that come up, right? In our relationships with people at work, outside of work, with our teams, with our businesses. Are we dealing with normal soreness, the growing pains, the ups and downs, the twists and turns, the inevitable successes and failures that go along with working, with building a business, with dealing with relationships, right? Or is it an actual injury, sort of metaphorically? Is there a problem? Is there an issue that really needs to be addressed, there needs to be some intervention? Do we need to make a change on the team? Do we need to get someone to come and mediate the conflict in the relationship because it's gotten so significant? Do we need some outside support with respect to the business, right? I've been thinking about this. Our older daughter, Samantha, has been at college for a few months. And again, like talking to her about life, about school, about friends, about classes, about all the things. And it's like, okay, what's the difference between kind of the normal? This is a lot of change in a short amount of time. So if you're feeling uncomfortable or you're feeling stressed out, as I'm talking to my 18-year-old daughter who's just starting college, but that's true for anyone starting anything new, a new job, moving to a new city, a promotion. It's like, is this normal? Is this kind of the healthy, typical type of growing pains that you go through when a big change happens? Or is this an actual problem that you need some extra help with? Right? It's like, our younger daughter, Rosie, is in 10th grade, and it's like she's got a whole new set of classes this year and a couple months in, right? It's like, oh, am I just getting up to speed with my new classes? Is it just new material and new teachers and I'm working it out? Or do I actually need a tutor to help me in geometry or whatever? And again, you could use this metaphor in so many contexts, but I do think for us to really think about the difference between normal soreness, which is about growth, which is about change, which is about evolution, which is about figuring stuff out. And if we're doing stuff that matters to us, there is going to be some element of soreness, right? There is going to be some element of like, wow, that took some effort. That was a little different. That pushed me out of my comfort zone. That's a good thing. That's healthy versus, is this an actual injury? Like, is this a problem? Do I need to stop doing this, or do I need to adjust how I'm doing this or what I'm doing? Do I need to get some additional help, some support, right? It's like, look, I appreciate how much we talk more about mental health in our society these days, which I think is super important. And sometimes I get concerned with labeling everything, right? If everything's trauma, nothing's trauma. If everything's anxiety, then nothing's anxiety. And I don't mean to minimize it at all, but like there's a difference between feeling kind of stressed out or nervous about something because I have a big test or a big meeting or there's a lot on the line versus like I'm dealing with clinical anxiety that actually needs, you know, intervention, therapy, medication, some kind, right? And again, I don't pretend to be an expert. Not only am I not a medical expert, I'm definitely not a, psychiatric or psychological expert as it pertains to these things. But I do think we have to know the difference, right? Having gone through, my own bouts of depression and some mental health challenges, knowing the difference between, is this an actual depression? Is this an actual, you know, clinical anxiety, or is this simply just the ups and downs of life? And again, sometimes we're not always sure. We can't always determine that for ourselves. So maybe it is helpful in those cases to have an outside expert, a doctor, a therapist, a psychiatrist, a mentor, a coach, someone that we trust that can give us some feedback like, what's going on here? Right? Am I dealing with something significant, or is this just part of the natural, typical evolution of life? And again, some of this stuff is subjective. There's lots of gray area, but I do think us thinking about the difference between soreness and injury as we think about parenting, right? Depending on the age of our kids. I mean, think about if you have kids or you've been around kids when kids are little, when they fall down at the park, right? If you freak out and run over to them like it's the worst thing that happened in the world, they're going to freak out. And then sometimes you realize, and especially after you have your second or your third kid, it's usually easier not to freak out when they fall down at the park or slip off the swing or whatever. You realize, oh, they're fine. I mean, if they're really hurt, they will usually tell you. And again, if you think about, I was talking to a buddy of mine about this, who's got kids the same age as mine. So they're, college age, late high school age. And we were talking about parenting at this stage being very different than parenting when they're little. But he was like, when they're little, though, if you're really paying attention, you can tell the difference between the cries. Like sometimes it's a cry for attention, sometimes it's a cry that they're hungry, sometimes it's a cry that they're hurt. And being able to try to figure that out, not always easy to do, and sometimes we misread it. But again, when we're dealing with other people, when we're coaching other people, if people are coming to us with issues at work, sometimes the issue is really a 3, but we react like it's a 7. Sometimes the issue is a 7 and we react like it's a 3. And it's tricky, right? Because everyone's wired differently. But this distinction between soreness and actual injury is a really important distinction if you think about it in lots of different contexts, right? Is there a real problem that I need to intervene with, or is this just natural soreness? Can I push back in a respectful way when someone comes to me with a problem and really encourage them, challenge them to figure it out themselves or go work it out with the person? Now, it might be to the point where that relationship has gotten so fractured, you do need to intervene as the manager and help mediate the situation because they're not going to. They're either going to avoid each other or it's going to get worse. So, again, when people often ask me about conflicts, I'm like, the best way to deal with a conflict is directly and have people work it out with each other. But sometimes that won't work. And sometimes that'll make things worse. Sometimes that'll create an injury when what was there was simply just some soreness. But we have to be able to know the difference. And again, we're going to get this wrong sometimes with ourselves, with other people. But if we can think about it in this context and really ask ourselves, okay, wait a minute, before I freak out about this thing with someone else or with myself, can I really just check in? Is this just normal, natural soreness, or is this an injury? Is this something that really is broken that needs to be fixed or addressed in that way? And I think running things through this rubric is important. Again, tricky at times, hard sometimes when there's lots of other people involved in different ways of relating to things, but an important distinction. So, what can we do? What are some specific action steps that we can take in this regard? The first thing we can do is just pay attention. Pay attention, right? Pay attention to our bodies, listen to our bodies. What kind of soreness or what kind of injury might be showing up. Now, hopefully, you're not dealing with any soreness or injury. That doesn't always have to be the case, but that tends to be a part of life. And even when we're healthy and in, taking decent care of ourselves and fortunate enough to be in good health, we're going to deal with some soreness at times. We're going to deal with some injuries at times, right? Understanding and paying attention. Outside of our physical well being, same thing with our mental and emotional well being. Can we pay attention? Am I dealing with natural, typical stress, ups and downs of life, or is this something more significant that actually is more of an injury? Now, mental and emotional injuries are often harder to determine, right? Again, you hurt your knee, you hurt your ankle, you hurt your shoulder, it hurts. You kind of know. Now, maybe you're someone who runs to the doctor and gets help right away. Maybe you're someone who tries to tough it out. In either case, the physical ones are harder to ignore. The mental, emotional ones, little more difficult. And depending on how we're wired, depending on how we were raised and socialized and what we think about getting help for things mentally, emotionally, that can be a different thing. But really paying attention, because sometimes it is just something I can work out myself. I can work out through meditation and prayer and talking to friends or, listening to podcasts or whatever. Sometimes I might actually need some additional help and support. And again, just because we get additional help and support doesn't necessarily mean it's an injury using this metaphor, right? It could just be normal soreness. I have an awesome therapist that I work with personally. Michelle and I have a couples therapist that we work with. We actually have a session later today. And it's not necessarily because something's broken or there's an injury. It can be at times, but it's also often just for maintenance and well being. Now, again, not as it relates to our physical health and well being or even our mental, emotional health and well being. When we're thinking about our relationships, our teams, our work, can we pay attention? And really ask ourselves, is this soreness or is this an injury? Does this really need to be addressed or some kind of intervention, or is this just part of the process, part of the uncertainty and the growth and the growing pains of building strength, of building trust, of building what we want? So that's the first thing we can do, is pay attention. The second thing we can do is take really good care of ourselves as best as we can and be mindful of this. Again, whether it's soreness, whether it's physical soreness, mental, emotional soreness, relational soreness, team soreness, whatever, business soreness, can we be mindful and tend to that soreness if it shows up in whatever way? If there's an actual injury, are we willing to take the time off necessary to actually tend to that injury, get the help, get the support that we need? Right? So taking care of ourselves, being mindful as much as we can, aware, but then really committing to ongoing care and nurturing of ourselves, of others, of our relationships, of what's going on. Because in doing both of those things, paying attention and taking good care, again, easier said than done. I realize that that's going to address a lot of the things that come up. And usually things don't just come up out of the blue. Now, look, every now and again, you take a wrong step, you fall down the stairs, actually or metaphorically, and something blows up that wasn't an issue. Now all of a sudden we have a massive injury that we need to address. More often than not, the vast majority of the time, things are gradual and the soreness escalates before it actually turns into an injury. So if we can pay attention, first step, and then really take good care of ourselves and tend to the relationships and the people around us, that soreness is much less likely to turn into an injury if we're paying attention, right? The third thing, and probably most important thing that we can do, whether we're dealing with no soreness at all, some soreness, or an actual injury, is be willing to ask for help. Be willing to get support. I mean, I talk about this a lot on the show. You've heard me say this many times. I almost always share this in some way, shape, or form when I'm speaking, but it's like most of us love helping other people. Very few of us are comfortable asking for help. We want to be of service to others. We want to make a difference for others. We want to be valuable to other people, which is a beautiful thing. But it takes a lot of courage to ask for help. We're afraid we'll get judged. We're afraid we'll get rejected. We're afraid people will say yes when they really mean no and then be resentful. So, look, it's a vulnerable act to ask for help. Absolutely. It's just necessary in life if we're going to grow, if we're going to change, if we're going to heal, if we're going to evolve, if we're going to, right? Again, even if things are going great and there's no soreness whatsoever, still being able to ask for help and get support and get feedback and coaching and accountability support, whatever it is going to benefit us. When we're dealing with some soreness and maybe we aren't exactly sure how to best deal with it, or we're not sure if it's an injury or not, or how significant it is, or whatever the case may be, getting some feedback from others, having some other input perspective can be super helpful. When we're dealing with an injury, we're often forced to get help, whether we want to or not. Right. And that is one of the silver linings of the injuries in life, the physical injuries, but also the others. Not that they're fun or easy, and I don't mean to sugarcoat them, but they require a certain level of humility. They force us into leaning on other people. But what if we didn't have to just wait until there was an injury to actually ask for help? Because we can, right? Anytime. And yes, it takes courage. And yes, we might get judged. Yes, we might get rejected. Yes, someone might say yes when they mean no and resent us for it and not tell us. We can't control any of that. But the answer is always no if you don't ask. So asking for support, looking for support proactively, because what happens when you ask for support, number one, you'll get more, right? The answer is always no if you don't ask, as I said. Number two, you'll model it. If you're in any position of leadership or part of any group or team, which all of us are to some degree, you then make it a little bit more conducive in the environment you're in, safer in the environment. Oh, he asked for help. She asked for help. I guess I can ask for help. And then the third thing that's so important, this is the big unlock, and you've probably heard me say this before because I talk about this a lot, is when you ask for help, not only do you get help and support, you give other people the opportunity to do something that most people love to do, which is what? Help. So these three things, while simple on the surface, when it comes to really taking care of ourselves, when it comes to paying attention, when it comes to knowing the difference between soreness and an actual injury, paying attention is the first step, being aware, tending to and caring for ourselves and others as best as we can, proactively, ongoingly, and then ultimately asking for help and support. Those three things, fundamental to so much in life, in our relationships with our teams in business. But if we can do that, then we have much more ability, facility around understanding if we're actually dealing with healthy, natural, typical soreness that's part of the growth journey, or an actual injury that needs tending to, that we need to take a step back, sit ourselves down, take some time to actually recover. This dynamic shows up in life all the time in so many different ways. So, thanks for listening or watching if you're watching on YouTube. Make sure to hit the follow or the subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. And there's some links in the show notes of the podcast and down below in the copy of the video where you can connect with me on social media or learn more about my work. Best place to do that is at our website, which is mike-robbins.com. Until next time, keep bringing your whole self to work, to life, and remember, we're all in this thing together.